Hi, this is Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of Regalytics, with your update on this week's 19,379 regulatory alerts. I'm in the freezing ass cold of New York City in the midst of the EDM Data Vision 2025 conference with Dessa Glaser. I'm surrounded by the women, data professionals, yes, and we are having a fantastic evening. The regulator of the week is actually the whole family of regulators, the Watchdogs, I like to call them, because 1,000 years ago when I was in undergrad, I stupidly thought I could be James Bond by taking lots of language classes rather than focusing on fluency in just one language other than English. Rookie mistake, because I can say hello and goodbye in probably 14 languages, but I really only understand English. Anyway, Weirdo here got way into Latin, speaking of useless facts, but there was one quote I loved. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who watches the watchers? In other words, who will guard the guards themselves? The concept is exactly why the Government Accountability Office and the OIGs, the Office of Inspector Generals, exist. In the 1970s, after a series of scandals and growing distrust in internal oversight, Congress created the OIGs to be the independent watchdogs inside federal agencies, the watchers of the watchers. So there is a corresponding audit for each agency. The SEC OIG, the FTC OIG, the FDIC OIG. There's even an OIG for the Government Accountability Office. They are independent auditors who confirm the agency itself is complying with rules and regulations, including labor and employment, cyber rules, and more. Right now, with so many agencies understaffed or operating on fumes, there's a general concern that the OIGs might be functionally dead. But this week proved that some of them are very much alive. First, quite the news story, because the Department of Defense OIG reviewed the Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's use of Signal to discuss sensitive military operations. The report, which I skimmed because it's 84 pages long, essentially concludes that while the person who is technically in charge of deciding whether or not something is classified is in fact the Secretary of Defense, in this case, he did not follow a pre-existing policy to refrain from using a personal device. The investigation was linked to a different report released the same day by the same agency, which focuses on whether training was adequate, and no surprise, the report suggests that the Chief Information Officer of the DoD could do a better job doing compliance training. Also this week, the Government Accountability Office agreed to launch an investigation into whether the Federal Housing Finance Agency Director William Pulte, chair of both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's boards, and other FHFA employees potentially misused federal authority and resources to publicly accuse prominent Democrats and President Donald Trump's perceived political enemies of mortgage fraud. Also this week, the GAO released an inspection on Proptech, which is property technology, and its emerging risks. They're looking at how technology platforms are influencing pricing, tenant screening, rental algorithms, and whether concentrated data power could distort local housing markets. Depending on how GAO frames the risk, that could open the door to future rulemakings at HUD, FTC, CFPB, or even state AGs. Proptech has been growing fast in the shadows, and this might be the moment regulators begin treating it like a structural force rather than a little innovation. The topic of the week is the National Defense Authorization Act. For those of you who don't know, the NDAA is passed every year in December, and its main purpose is to fund the military. It's usually full of purchase orders, like the Navy gets X hundred million for ships and Y hundred million for planes. But every year, lawmakers tuck in massive Easter eggs into the NDAA, things that would never pass as standalone bills, but can hitch a ride on this must-pass piece of legislation. The Jobs Act, FATCA, the Corporate Transparency Act, all of these massive rules came out in December's as subchapters of the NDAA. This year is no different. One example is the Road to Housing Act, tucked inside the NDAA, which is meant to bolster the supply chain of housing and cut red regulatory tape associated with buying and selling a home. Another is the ongoing debate over the AI moratorium language, which again proposes to stop the U.S. states, from passing any AI regulation. I sincerely doubt the moratorium will survive the final version, but as of now, it is still there. And finally, the Forge Act, which is supposed to massively overhaul and streamline the process for the government to buy products and services. I will again await its passage before I dig deeper, but in case these things are on your radar, the time to speak up is now. And that's it this week for Reguletics. We have the global supply chain of the world's regulatory alerts in one very easy to use place. If you need a solution for anything related to regulation, give us a call.